Cecilia, and welcome to Haydn Behind the Music Stand. I'm your host, Patty Ryan, and with me is CL Behrens, who is the bass trombonist with Opera San Jose, Symphony Silicon Valley, and Stockton Symphony. He also teaches privately in the Cupertino, Saratoga area, and now over Zoom, and composes and arranges minimalist music for trombone ensemble. And we'll be talking about repairing cars, in particular, his 71 Volkswagen Super Beetle. Welcome, CL. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're my first guest that we might have crossed paths a couple times.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, like I didn't really have like a previous personal relationship with you, in a friendship or anything like that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like congratulations, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that's not really the right word, but welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I'm real excited. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast the last couple months.
Yeah. Also, I'm really excited to have a brass player on the podcast.
Am I actually the first one, or have you been able to interview some folks?
You're the first one.
Great. I'm first impressions of what brass players are to the rest of the world. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. No, absolutely not. So it's funny because this all kind of stemmed from John Zinn.
Right.
You can all go listen to his episode as well, entitled Googly-Eyed Goldfish or something, because we talked about circular breathing.
Oh, his was all the cooking stuff.
Yep. But through him, he posted a photo of us doing this interview. And then your girlfriend contacted me saying, hey, like my boyfriend is a bass trombonist. He should be on the podcast. And so it all just kind of came together.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I know John from Nomad Sessions. That whole crew are all friends of mine. And John posted when he did his interview back in late summer, early fall, wherever that fell. Mm-hmm. And Catherine reached out. And then when his episode aired, I reached back out to you. It's like, hey, it's like just following up. And we're like, yeah, let's make this happen.
Let's do it. Yeah, really excited. And for me, it's an example of just how small this music community is. It's only one person apart or so that you meet another fellow musician.
Right.
And that's
and we got talking and it's like, okay, yeah, we both know John, but then you work for the youth orchestra.
Right.
And I'm dear friends with the youth orchestra manager and a whole myriad of other folks from SFCM.
Right. And this is also what we sort of discovered is that you had just graduated from SFCM the same year that I just started. So we just missed each other.
Yeah.
But I do remember seeing you at parties or seeing you around Symphony Hall, because as you were reminding me earlier that you would sometimes be the brass coach.
Yeah, I'd come and do low brass coaching for the youth orchestra if Jason was short someone last second.
Right. So it's just, again, it's one of those things where it's like a misconnection, but then also like, we know so many mutual people that it was bound to meet on the podcast in some way. So this is kind of awesome.
Very much so.
So because we don't necessarily have the funny story, I want to ask you, what's the strangest group you've been a part of?
There's a brass band that I play in called Trash Can Marching Band. We dress up in full clown makeup and go around playing events. Like we'll play with Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras stuff, processions. We'll do Burning Man events. We usually do Lagunitas Beer Circus up in Petaluma. We've gone all the way down to Las Vegas to do events down there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it's kind of points the band's really busy. And then, well, obviously the pandemic were dark, but then we'll go like 9 months and have nothing. And then all of a sudden we'll get like 4 or 5 gigs within a 2-month period. It's just kind of hot and cold, but it's a ton of fun. It's a great release for me. I enjoy it because it isn't like the super serious, oh, we're in a band. We have to sound really good. We have to practice and rehearse all the time. We do rehearse, but it's way more laid back and just, it's fun. And the folks in the band are just a huge treat. It really feels like old San Francisco before tech came in.
Yeah.
Started forcing lots of artists out with rising cost of living and whatnot.
Right. And it's certainly silly if you're dressing up as clowns, right?
Yeah.
Are you ready for some Spitfire questions?
Yes.
Okay. Mozart or Beethoven?
Beethoven, only because the bass trombone solo in Beethoven 9, amazing writing.
Yeah. Can you remind me which movement that's in?
The bass trombone solo in Beethoven 9 is in the last movement after the whole Banda scene and the first like real full choir sing out of the theme. And then it stops and then it's just the bass trombone giving, essentially he wrote it where we're giving pitches so the men have their pitch to sing because it's just male chorus and me for like 8 or 12 bars. So no pressure to not chip a note then.
Right, exactly. Does that happen to be, is that like an excerpt in it all, or is it? It is. It's a huge one. Okay.
Yeah, it's an excerpt for sure.
All right. Shostakovich or Prokofiev?
Shostakovich.
Netflix or video games?
Video games.
Basil or cilantro?
I'm going to throw a third-party candidate out there and say marjoram.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I mean, I love basil and cilantro. I use them all the time in my cooking. no matter what, I use marjoram every way I can, and fresh when I can get my hands on it. Just because I like it. I think it's underused in a lot of cooking because it's so different. Everyone's like, oh, wow. They think it's like this new amazing cooking technique. I'm like, nah, I just use a different herb. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's like a good blend between oregano and basil. Yeah. It kind of marries those two flavors. Yeah. So note to listeners, check out margarine. Whoops.
Marjoram, not margarine, not the butter substitute.
Yeah. No. Whoops. Okay. Harry Potter, Star Wars, or Lord of the Rings?
Star Wars through and through.
Yeah.
I mean, Lord of the Rings is a close second, but Star Wars.
Does it have anything to do with the music? Because I know that John Williams loves to write for the brass.
Yes, there is some of that, but I grew up, my dad loved Star Wars, so me and my little brother were indoctrinated into that pretty early on, and I voraciously read Star Wars novels middle school through high school and just couldn't get enough of that whole universe. And then when I got introduced to Lord of the Rings, I'd read the books just a couple years before the movies started coming out, and the music in that, the music across the board for all of it's great. And well, once the pandemic's over, we'll be finishing up a cycle through all the Harry Potter films.
Oh, okay.
In San Jose.
Yeah.
So I've gotten to play all the Harry Potter music. I love Star Wars. We've done the first Star Wars movie in San Jose, and Lord of the Rings. I just missed by a season doing a full run of the Lord of the Rings films.
Oh, I see. Valley. Well, I'm sure they're going to come around. They're so popular. And
well, hopefully we'll see how the pandemic affects the markets and what people are willing to pay for everything. And for that matter, how long this pandemic goes, if there's going to be any orchestras left. I don't want to think on the negative, but that's definitely something that's to be acknowledged just for the sanity of planning long term.
And actively, I think, on all of our minds as musicians during, let's move forward.
Yes.
Symphony or chamber music?
Symphony. I enjoy chamber music. It's just, I ran a trombone quartet in high school and learned a lot about chamber music that way and kind of got everything I wanted out of it. And I know every string player is going like, what do you mean you got everything out of chamber music? It's a lifelong endeavor. Symphonic music is what I love doing. And there's just not tons of brass chamber music opportunities.
I'm sure
Bruckner, sorry to your wrist.
Oh, I love Bruckner. No, I love Bruckner. I'm happy to do the tremolo personally.
Okay, you're the first string player I've met to say that.
I know. I'm an anomaly for sure.
We're allowed to be friends. It's okay.
Okay. Okay, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Favorite practice room?
One where I'm not told to go elsewhere.
Ooh.
I don't have a favorite practice room. I guess any big space that I can get into that has a little bit of reverb. Otherwise, the little hole in the walls.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I can't remember who, but one of your folks was talking about the practice rooms at Oberlin.
Mm-hmm.
In Robertson, there were 2 floors full of practice rooms essentially, and the inner ring of the practice rooms of the hallway were awful for trombone because you basically have to set up in one corner, and that would just give you barely enough room to be able to reach the slide all the way to the opposite corner. So the trombone players, we'd always be seeking out the bigger rooms just so we had space and we didn't have to sit there worrying about, am I about to dent my slide and have to go spend $300-$400 to get my slide fixed by someone?
I've never, as a string player, I've been so ignorant. I have never thought of that as an issue. And obviously the architects never thought of that as an issue either,
Oh God, no one thinks that. They're like, oh, the trombones will figure it out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like you guys have been oppressed or something.
Oh, don't worry. We oppress everyone else in other ways.
Okay, so
it's karma.
Favorite professor shout out?
Ooh, excluding my private teachers, because Jim DeSano from Oberlin and John Engelkist from SFCM, they would get the clear shout outs. They helped me through a lot in life and playing. Outside of that, I would say I'd give David Conti a shout out.
Okay.
Just because I took his 21st century symphonic maximers class, and just how he went about describing his analysis of music, the background, middle ground, foreground stuff is amazing. And I would use in my brief stint playing in rock bands and commercial projects, I used a lot of that to help figure out what kind of horn line I was going to write for a tune, or how to help friends figure out why a song wasn't working. I was able to use that knowledge in a completely different context.
Yeah.
And he probably intended any of us to use it. So that was really enjoyable. And plus, he and I are friends now. We run each other several times a year, have a lot of friends in the same circles.
Yet again, how small the music world is, right?
Extremely small.
Yeah. And also, just for my listeners, he's a composition professor at...
Yeah, he's composition professor at SFCM. And then, the other person, Dr. Terry Kaler, he was my physics teacher in high school.
Oh.
I had him for biology my freshman year, and then I had him for AP physics my junior year, and I TA'd for him my senior year. I attribute him where I get my really, really dry and dark sense of humor. I remember specifically, we'd be sitting there discussing rotational dynamics in physics class, and he presented, it's like, so you're sitting there juggling 3 chainsaws. Like, how can we figure out how to juggle it so you always are grabbing a handle to turn? And we'd all sit there and be like, wait, chainsaws? Hold on.
Well, but I mean, I kind of love that example because science and, all that is so accurate and specific. Like, if you don't get it right, could cut
your hand.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like, in that way, it's so visceral and it makes you have to care about what you're calculating and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I mean, yeah, he was just nice teacher and just very chill about everything. So Conti and Kaler are the 2 shout outs for that.
Great. Most inspired musical hero of any genre?
It's a tough one.
I know.
There's so many, of any genre. I think someone beat me to it, but I mean, Stevie Wonder is a win. It's so easy because his music covers so many, there's just so much to it that even after listening to it over and over, I'm watching and learning so much more about his music. And it blows my mind every time because, someone will come out with a new analysis or I'll be talking with a buddy and they're like, oh, did you ever catch this in this Stevie tune? I'd be like, wait, what? And they'll show me. I'm like, this changes everything.
Yeah.
It's very easy to apply our real detailed analytical approach that we learn in theory to his stuff and to just understand, and it all equates out. And it's just wild how deep his music goes and the various connections that you can make at different levels to each other as well. It's nuts.
Yeah. Most transformative performance experience?
Playing Mahler 3. I was back home in Iowa, subbing with Orchestra Iowa now, was Cedar Rapids Symphony Orchestra growing up, subbing with them as an extra trombone for Mahler 3. And my mom was in the choir.
Oh, cool.
That was a big deal. I mean, I should premise also, growing up, my dad played trombone professionally and he played in the orchestra there. There was a whole bunch of emotions just getting to do that symphony there. Because I'm a big fan of Mahler.
Oh my God.
I've always felt like the third symphony, everyone's like, well, the first symphony is a hero symphony. And then they're like, and then the resurrection is number 2. But I've always felt at least that there's some sort of connection to the very first movement of the third symphony into those first 2 symphonies. I just feel like that's really like the mourning the loss of the hero from the first 2, and then you get some nice incidental music and a really nice ending to the symphony.
I remember very vividly the first time I listened. I think it was the San Francisco Symphony actually when they played Mahler 3. Yeah, and I was just blown away. It is a commitment to listen to. I'm not going to lie to the listeners, but man, what a commitment! It's like just like watching a really good movie, an hour and 30 minutes long.
It's long, but you get enough diversity in the music and the inner movements, and then that last movement's something
I
else.
think there's a moment in the last movement I was tearing up as I was watching because just the music was just gut-wrenching, and the theme of ba-da-da-da coming back, and the main trombone theme I think is and it's got a trombone solo. I mean, come on, a trombone player doesn't like that. Right. Next piece you'd like to learn?
I've been slowly working through tenor trombone etude books, and I want to get through the Boutry, which is the little bit I understand just high note murder for tenors, which will just make it even more interesting for being a bass trombonist. But just trying to work my way through the tenor etude stuff so I know the pieces and know how to go about teaching it to my future advanced students.
Is that stretching your range in a sense when you're practicing this so that you can more reliably hit those top notes? Or
well, I mean, for tenors, it's just developing the flexibility in the upper and just being able to make it sound effortless. And I practiced up in that register anyways. I'm going to say this, and there's going to be a bunch of tenor trombonists that are going to be scoffing at me saying this, but over the pandemic, one of the first things I did was just take the time to finally learn bolero. Not the third trombone part, the first trombone part, which has got a very scary solo in it with lots of high notes. But I finally got it where it wouldn't win an audition, but it wouldn't be laughable either.
Yeah.
So, I work in the high register just because all it takes is one phone call and having high notes and Actually, here, great example. In January, San Francisco Symphony, they called me on a Monday, like, hey, can you do the Chinese New Year concert on Saturday? I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I think within 15 minutes of that, Tim Higgins had texted me, and Tim was like, hey, you should get down here and pick up the music. There's some hard stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up, and get down there and see there. And lo and behold, in one of the pieces, I have a high D flat.
Oh, that's like the Bolero one, right?
Yeah, it's the same high note in Bolero. Yeah, so I'm just like, well, good thing I have been practicing and working on my high range, because if I hadn't, I would have been
probably not hired next time or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what would happen.
Sorry, I don't know if that's too blunt, but
no, it's true. I mean, I was trying to think of a way not to make it, but yeah, I mean, you go in and you sound unprepared, you don't get called again. That's just part of the business.
Unfortunately.
So, you know, and it was a great example. At that point, I had several students like, well, I mean, come on, who's going to write a high C in a trombone band part? And I just came back and was like, look, here you go. And they're like, I can't even read that. I'm like, that's because it's in tenor clef and we haven't even talked about that yet.
Right. Sit down. No, I'm just kidding.
It's like, this is why you practice high range that you don't expect to ever need, because
one day you might happen. You have that ace up your sleeve for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for that little bit of education on my end. And on that note, though, we've concluded the Spitfire questions. Right. Congrats. Okay. Can you tell me, since I literally don't even know that much, can you walk me through your musical origin story? How did you pick up the trombone? And then why did you decide to go into music professionally? Also, one of my big questions is, part of it's what's the difference between tenor trombone and bass trombone? Mm-hmm. But then also, like, why did you choose bass trombone?
Yeah.
At some point. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My dad played professionally with what was then Cedar Rapids Symphony Orchestra. So I grew up with trombone in the house all the time. And I remember 5th grade, you know, middle school band directors going around, do mouthpiece tests and all of that.
Oh, sure. I remember.
What are you decent at? And, you know, they went through everything. It's like, oh, well, you could do trumpet, or, you know, trombone's pretty close to that. So I was like, well, dad plays trombone. Well, free lessons. I'll save my parents some money. Great. Problem solved. So I decided to play trombone then.
Quick question. Was your dad a tenor trombonist or a bass?
Yeah, dad was a tenor trombonist.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and I'd started piano like 4th grade or something. We'd had one around and I'd expressed enough interest in goofing around on it and making awful atonal music that they're like, okay, let's actually get you playing so it doesn't sound awful all the time when you're on the piano. So yeah, 6th grade, picked up trombone and went through. I had early success with honor bands and All-State and whatnot, and was like, well, okay, I guess I'm pretty good at this. I should maybe take a stab at this for, you know, a job. You know, dad can do it. I mean, it can't be that hard, really, could it? How I was wrong on so many levels. Yeah, because, you know, got into all the schools I applied to for college, went to Oberlin for undergrad. And I think it was about halfway through the first semester, I realized how screwed I was. And just seeing how much more everyone was practicing and just how much better they were and just how oblivious I was. Because that was the first time I really learned, like, I have to learn 30, 40 odd some excerpts and be able to just play them at the drop of a needle. Yeah, that's the right phrase.
Hat
drop,
coin, choose your accessory.
So yeah, I figured out then that I was screwed and started practicing more and just kind of buckled down and figured out what it was going to take to be good at trombone. Senior year of college, I actually won the job with the now defunct Opera Cleveland. So played with them for a couple seasons, came out to SFCM after finishing undergrad. So I was playing with the Opera Cleveland and doing my master's out here in San Francisco.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I thought that you finished at Cleveland and then did. So, okay. So it was simultaneous.
Yeah, that was simultaneous. And then won the job with Stockton in between my 2 years at SFCM. Graduated SFCM, got a day job, played in Stockton, did that for a while, and then did a whole bunch of rock bands in various different groups. So that was a lot of fun. But then 2015, I won the job with Silicon Valley. At that point, I had been considering moving down to LA. I'd really gotten into commercial stuff. I had a couple friends from undergrad that had somehow actually broken through all the nonsense in LA, and they were getting some sessions, recording sessions along with playing in bands and everything. And they were like, why don't you just come down here? You know, you'd fit in real quick and we can get you past all the first couple of years of pain just because we're already in the system. I'm like, great. But yeah, then I won the Silicon Valley job, and then the next year won the opera job and just settled down here and refocused on classical playing. And now I have a teaching studio, Cupertino, Saratoga, that's just right above San Jose.
Right.
And I do that and sub around when I'm not playing with my contract groups. And, you know, I've done a little bit of composition and arranging for folks over the years. That's mostly stems out of when I was playing with rock bands, just doing horn line stuff for folks. Because for a little bit, I was one of the folks that people would call if they wanted a horn section on a tune. It's like the studios just knew. It's like, oh, yeah. It's like, well, we could get CL. He's cheaper than some other folks.
I see.
Depending
Okay.
on budgetary stuff. So
yeah. Okay. So that arranging was mainly for the really
the commercial stuff. Like,
the commercial stuff.
I just call it, like, if it wasn't classic, I called it commercial.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
all the bands, all like the clown band falls under that. You know, anything that wasn't an orchestra or a chamber setting.
Okay. So all the commercial horn lines you wrote,
Mhm.
how did that turn into you writing minimalist music for trombone?
That came out of just, I really like ambient music and just listen to that, you know, using it for meditation and on the rare occasion they actually do yoga. But I just find it really centering at the end of the day. It's like I'll fall asleep to that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy exploring how I can do that organically with trombone. And one day I'll get an EP out with all this stuff that I've kind of been slowly piecing together and writing and use that to advertise the yoga studios. Because I figured, like, you know, if we can get in a yoga studio and get 6 trombones, it'd be a pretty big studio to fit all that. But to be able to have live music during, I feel like that's a really unique, I mean, I guess that's some like upper crust stuff too, but it'd be cool. It's unique. It's different.
Well, it's different than all the flutes you hear, you know, not to hate on flutes, but
well, and the trombone is so close to the human voice in timbre.
And it's such a bell-like sound that it's
a warm, rich sound that it can be just really calming. It doesn't have to be the obnoxiously loud Bruckner or
your Ride of the Valkyries or something like that.
It doesn't always have to be Ride of the Valkyries. You know, Berlioz has a great quote about trombones, and, you know, basically all he says, you know, on one hand they can rain doom upon you, on the other hand they can elevate you to a transcendental experience.
Yeah. Berlioz was definitely a smart cookie. Is that the saying? Well, yeah, I think that is the saying. Yeah, I mean, he definitely knew orchestration so well. And I agree. I think that trombone sometimes does get so easily classified, as I said, like the Ride of the Valkyries or something. That's, as you're saying, like bringing doom into Lawrence, like loud or whatever, just like blaring.
Yeah, I mean,
but
every string player is going to remember the trombone player who practices the ride obnoxiously loud in the practice room.
Yeah.
Like, you remember hearing that. You don't hear us practicing the Rhenish really quietly or Brahms.
Or Tuba Miram from, or
Tuba Miram.
Yep. Very beautiful. Yeah.
So, but we also enjoy playing loud. There's no
I mean, I should also, I'm sorry to sort of tangent off of your story, but that is one of the stereotypes, right, of trombone player. But people say
dragging Neanderthals.
No, well, no, I wasn't going to say that. No. I just meant like conductors in conducting class. You're like told not to tell the trombones to play more.
Strauss said that. Never look at the trombones. It only encourages them.
Right.
And that's true. If a conductor looks at us, we're just like, what do we do wrong? And we're like, no more. We're like, okay, fine, sure. And it's like, okay, take the safeties off. Let's take out the whole viola section.
Well, I mean, one of my questions, just as a string player in an orchestra, you know, people can say like brass people obliterate the strings and whatever, but there's a part of me that wants to sympathize and say, look, like, aren't you playing your instrument at the best tone that you can?
We should be.
Okay.
I mean, I can think of a couple times in a rehearsal where I was just like, okay, I just have to get this out of the system. So I've done it, and then can be politely told trombones that's too loud. Yeah, we're just trying to do our best of our ability to play the music as it should be done and to convey the emotional energy that the music represents. It's always about doing it beautifully. It has to sound good. Bass trombones get pegged for this a bunch. We have the special notoriety of being the ones that always go too far. I don't know why. Well, no, I know why, but if you make it sound good, no one's going to say anything. I think what string players are reacting to is a bad experience early on in their career or even in school where you had a trombone section that wasn't nice and they were like, no, we're going to play this rip roaring loud and we don't care what everyone else says around us. And that can really shape their opinion of the brass down the road. Either those people mature and learn that that's not the way to do it because we need to respect our colleagues that are in front of us, or I think a lot of those people don't make it into the business when you look long term.
Yeah.
I think it's just you got to respect your peers around you and pick and choose your moments when you're really going to be loud. It's like, you know, when I get a season schedule, I kind of go through, I'm like, like, okay, one, am I happy with this schedule? Is there enough on here for me to be excited about? And two, where's the concert set in the year that I can pick to just be like, all right, we're taking all the safeties off. We're going for it.
Yeah.
And to keep it to that. Because otherwise, if you play like that all the time, it just becomes the norm. And that moment, that really loud moment, no longer is as special as it was before.
Yeah, I get that. Thanks for clarifying some of that.
So on behalf of all the trombonists in the world, I apologize to all the violists and cellists and violinists that have such ill feelings towards us. We really are sorry. We're not trying to destroy your hearing on a regular basis, just maybe once or twice a season.
Fair enough. What is the difference between a tenor trombone and a bass trombone?
Aha! So I'll try and give a truncated,
Sure.
Because if we're going to go that, we should probably loop in alto trombone, just because from a historical standpoint. So back in the day, you would have bass trombone, tenor trombone, alto trombone. It'd just be first, second, third. It's how it all worked out. Mm-hmm. Over the years, tenor trombone became more predominant because for the longest time, even Beethoven's symphonies were alto, tenor, bass. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until after Beethoven that we started seeing sections with two tenors and a bass.
Okay.
So the gist is this, and we'll be able to get into why trombone reads at pitch and we don't transpose, but we have to read clefs.
Just like string players, or at least just like a cellist, I should say.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to look at it is like, with strings, and you have different size string instruments, we have different size trombones. Yeah. The range isn't as drastic, but it's the same effect. So, alto trombone was pitched at E flat, and we all read at concert pitch because the trombone and the predecessor, the sackbut, was a chromatic instrument. Mm-hmm. So we didn't need to transpose or change tuning crooks like the trumpets and French horns had to. So we've always read at concert pitch. That's why it's never transposing. So the alto trombone is set. The first position is an E flat overtone. Tenor trombone has traditionally been a B flat overtone series in first. Bass trombone back in the day was either F or G, depending on the instrument manufacturer.
Oh, interesting.
And then when sections started becoming two tenors and a bass, and a valve was introduced into the situation, bass trombones came up to be pitched also at the B flat overtone series. The difference now is that the bass trombone bell is bigger and our bore size is bigger, and our mouthpieces are bigger as well. It's just a bigger instrument. And then tenor trombone is a smaller bore size, smaller bell. And even with tenor trombones, there's a couple different ones. You have the symphonic trombone, which you're probably familiar with, seen at the back of the section. It's got the F attachment. They're playing big equipment. It's a large bore tenor trombone. There's a medium bore tenor trombone, and then there's small bore tenor trombones, which you'll see in jazz bands. And that small bore tenor trombone is what all trombonists start out on.
Got it.
Just because we all have to learn how to use our air, and to start on a big honking bass trombone right out the door, it's hard. You'd have a lot of kids quitting because they're like, I can't do anything with this. I can't even. So we all start out on little pea shooter tenor trombones. Some of us progress to bigger instruments as we improve and can manage the air for the instrument.
For me, I just need to clarify this too. What is a bore again? Is that just like...
Oh, bore size. It's how big the tubing is.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
It's, if I believe right, we measure diameter.
Okay.
The measure of the diameter. The size of the tubing is bigger on bass trombone. And traditionally now bass trombones have two valves. That's only been the case for the last 70 years.
Okay.
The current, setup of the bass trombone I play is really only 50, 60 years old. And we're still changing all that. We have different kind of valve setups. We're messing around with different metals that we're having in our instruments. It's still a developing instrument. It isn't like violin where, 400 years ago, everyone's like, yeah, that's how we're going to do it. Cool.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. That's cool.
That's the difference between bass trombone and tenor trombone. The short story is it's just bigger.
Yeah. So why did you gravitate towards that instrument?
I liked low notes.
Yeah.
I liked being low notes. I liked playing loud low notes. I loved being obnoxious. There was a call-in to bass trombone. I wanted nothing to do with this high note, fancy flute and tenor trombone nonsense. I was just like, yeah, high notes, they're fun. But like, did you hear those low notes and how cool they are?
Yeah. I mean, for me, speaking as a cellist, of course, we love playing on our C string, right? But there's a vibration that I feel with my instrument as I'm playing that's just the best feeling. And that's where I wonder if it's similar to...
Yeah, I like sitting at the bottom of the chord or playing the fifth right next to the two. And there's something that just I love about that. And a lot of also comes from like, I was playing in a jazz band in high school, and because I had some ability to instrument, we could play a lot of material because the bass trombone ends up being the bottom of the big band because we can play lower than the bari sax. So we got some notes in the basement and you're just playing along with the bass. We're just like an analog amplifier for the bass player.
I see.
I just would have fun because there's tons of big band recordings out there with just really loud bass trombone. I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be loud.
Right. And just be the foundation of the entire ensemble.
Just be the foundation and just, the thing that everyone be good at because you want a good foundation.
Right.
And so, it just stemmed from that and just really loving playing those notes.
Well, I think that's as good of any potential answer.
I think there's probably also, my dad played tenor trombone, and whatever is the end thing to do, I always go do not the end thing. So I'm like, well, everyone plays tenor trombone. I'm going to go play bass trombone.
Right.
Whatever is trending, I'm going to do the opposite.
Okay. I also wanted to, as you were educating me before recording, sometimes the bass trombone can, I wouldn't say replace, but you can double the tuba, or sometimes you can actually cross over to that register as well.
Yeah, I mean, the tuba can still play lower than this. The tuba has the widest range of all the brass instruments.
Oh.
They can play really high, just as high as a tenor trombonist, and they got physical limiting of tubing on a bass trombone. They got notes below us.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, tuba wasn't always in orchestras. For the longest time, the bass trombone was the bottom voice of the orchestra. We would be there with the cello and the basses. The Brahms symphonies, well, except for Brahms 2, that has tuba. But the other 3 Brahms symphonies, like, I'm the bottom of the orchestra. All the Beethoven stuff, I'm the bottom of the orchestra.
In walks in the tuba, and then
oh, but I mean, they get such great stuff to it. It's great having the tuba there. I love having tuba on hand because they get a really warm, low sound there, and the bass trombone kind of just is great at providing a little extra direction out in the orchestra. Yeah, my job is to make the tuba and the trombones work together harmoniously.
Yeah, you connect from the most bottom to the most top of your section.
Yeah, and we're not playing a solo role. We're not getting melodies. It's like we're just the hardworking proletariat. We make everyone else sound great.
Yeah, there's a lot of really rewarding things from doing that. So,
and we get a solo every once in a while. We got Beethoven 9, we have Mahler 7, we have Nutcracker. We have opportunities. It's just we're a supporting role most of the time, and I'm just fine with that.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, of course, with COVID, a lot of things have been halted, especially with the symphonies, and especially being a brass player, I can't, at least some string players can kind of do gigs here and there, but you can still teach, right? And as you're saying, we've all adapted to teaching over Zoom. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And also, I believe I saw that you did a virtual recital.
So yeah, I've been teaching. I got really lucky in that the majority of my teaching studio has stuck with me during the pandemic. It was a steep learning curve in the spring when it was all new to us, but then over the summer, I was able to kind of get my head around the pedagogy and what I wanted to be doing with teaching and set up some online tools for my students. And that's really helped kind of streamline and solve some of the pedagogy issues of teaching over video feed instead of being in person.
Right.
And I've been enjoying that. But yeah, I just did last week, I did a solo recital, unaccompanied, no piano backing or whatnot, which is a larger undertaking. Even whenever you do a recital, you're kind of used to having other people on stage with you to play. And you might do one unaccompanied piece, just be like, yeah, we'll do something out of that. But this was all unaccompanied. Really, it was a vehicle just to keep me in shape and keep me motivated for practicing and do stuff that isn't just practicing excerpts over and over, because that gets tiring. When you've spent the time learning the excerpt, then you polish it up every once in a while for giggles. And otherwise, the idea is, you only need 2-3 months to get ready for an audition, not a whole year. And the pandemic's just, who knows when it's going to end. So the recital was a vehicle to keep me in shape, provide some challenging material. Like I did the 4th cello suite on it. So yeah, I did the recital, and I'm working on a etude book, Scale Studies for Trombone. We have some out there, and college students and professionals use them, but they're really advanced stuff. And this is more geared towards kids who are just wanting to take that next step in their seriousness about the instrument. And so it's scale studies that they can do at any tempo that they want. I'm releasing in 2 volumes. The first volume is just going to be major scales and the 3 minors. And then sometime later this spring or this summer, I'll be releasing the rest of the scales, the different modes that the major and minors don't cover.
Sure.
Those will be geared more towards those wanting to get better improvising and working on their scalar knowledge of the modes. Because I feel like a lot of even professionals, it's not like we're well versed in like, oh, hey, play Dorian scale in F. And we all like, wait a second. So it's meant for that, so we can get more comfortable. And so you can just grab the book and just find that particular scale. So you have a reference point, so you don't have to like go through the theory nightmare of figuring out what a Dorian scale in F would be.
Sure.
So yeah, it's just a resource that I haven't seen out there yet. It isn't anything inventive or unique. It's just a way to put the tools in front of students and professionals so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This just puts the notes in front of you, removing that hurdle of not having the music in front of you necessarily.
Right. That sounds like such an inventive and great project to do during this time, too, is to establish some kind of pedagogy book, not just for yourself, but for the longevity of trombonists out there. So,
yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to have alternate positions for both tenor and bass trombone in there. So it's going to be useful for everybody. It accounts for those that'll be having straight horns, those that'll have one valve, and those will have two valves, and the various combinations they can use. And hopefully we'll introduce some new, interesting alternate positions along the way for folks.
And the easiest way to find those when you release them would be at your website, I assume?
Yeah, my website, www.bonetrom.com. I'll have it up there. I may have it on a couple other sites. I'm still working out those details.
Okay.
But for sure, it'll be on my website and be offering a promo deal for the first month or so while it's up there. So.
Awesome. Are you ready to take a break?
Yeah.
Great. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. So before the break, you were saying some really kind words about what this podcast is. And I just want to say thank you so much to be here and also share your story and also support what I'm doing.
I mean, we could just create a feedback circuit on this.
Yeah, for
just going
sure.
back and forth thanking each other. So
Sure. But let's talk about your passion for repairing cars. And
yes.
I have to admit up front, I am very much an ignorant person when it comes to cars. Maybe the stereotype or something, but I don't know much about it. I do just take my car to Pep Boys to get it oil changed. I just say, like, please just fix this and I will, hopefully you're not scamming me or whatever. So anyway, that's just my disclaimer. I guess for me, I also wanted to ask, like, how did you get into repairing cars? How did that interest spark?
I was oblivious, just like you. I was oblivious about cars for most of my life. It was when I moved to San Francisco for my master's. And then I had a 2006 Pontiac G6 that my mom gave me as it was birthday, graduation, and Christmas for a couple years present when I graduated from Oberlin and drove that out here to California. And that served me well. It was a couple of years into being out here when I just remember I had a day, I needed to get the brakes done on the car and went into the dealership, and the dealership's like, oh, that's $500 an axle. I'm just like, you want $1,000 to do my brakes?
Wow.
Like, that's ridiculous. Shopped around, found someone that could do a little bit cheaper, but it's still like $700. Like, this is nuts. So I knew I had a buddy, Alex Bedner, who's a trombone player out here as well. He was really into working on cars. And I had told him this story. He's like, dude, you just need to do your own brakes. It isn't that hard. It's not complicated. And so I think the next time I needed to do the brakes, you know, he came over and showed me how to do it. I think what was more eye-opening to me was the actual parts only cost me $120 or $125.
Right.
So when I was even paying just the $700, almost $600 of that was just labor. And I'm just like, $700, like that's a paycheck for a week of playing in an orchestra.
Or that's partial rent or rent, depending on where you live.
At that point, that would have been a month's rent for me as well, where I was living. So I was just like, this is ridiculous. Why? No. So learned how to do brakes, and then byproduct learned how to do my oil changes on that Pontiac. And it saved me probably $1,000 or $2,000 in costs while that car was still around. And I got the bug that way.
So essentially out of necessity was really how that came about.
It's just like everything that the cooking I've learned, how to make furniture, how to work on my car, they all stemmed from necessity of making money as a musician, but living in a relatively expensive place. I really appreciate being able to do something with my hands. Growing up in Iowa, I have a lot of friends that, they work in the trades. My little brother is a carpenter and a farmer. So I like being able to say, oh, I can still do stuff. I am useful. I'm not just this kid playing trombone that you can't do anything for myself. I didn't realize how much I missed that until I started working on the car, because I built stuff and tinkered with stuff growing up in Iowa, not on a level of tinkering with cars, mostly because I didn't want to upset my parents. But, it's like I could lash stuff together from growing up in scouting and everything, and knew how to go about boating and fishing and tying knots. But the car repair, it was a necessity originally. And now I just really like it because I now own a vintage Beetle. What I would have spent to get a decent used car that it would run for another 10 years. I've been able to use that money, and now I have a VW that's a little souped up, and internally everything's running great. And I know how to fit, like, for example, the master cylinder, which is really important to the stopping of a vehicle. The master cylinder is when you push down a brake pedal, that's what your brake pedal pushes into, which then pushes the hydraulic brake fluid through the brake lines out to your calipers or your drum brakes, which then compresses the pads onto the rotor, which then slows the car down.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that was the original master cylinder. My car just turned 50 years old on the 4th.
Okay.
I have the
Happy
original
birthday.
receipt. Yeah, happy birthday, Cece.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that was the original master cylinder. But it took some time, but it was really just enjoyable to be, once the recital was done, just sit down, go work on the car, and have something to do to keep my mind off of the, oh, I chipped that note in the recital, and this phrase could have gone better. It's like, oh, that wasn't really the articulation that was written on the page.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Or the car doesn't talk back to me. Yeah. I mean, it does when things don't want to work when they should, but yeah, the car doesn't talk back.
Right. Okay, so tell me how you came about the 71 Volkswagen CC or Cecilia or
Cecilia. Yeah, I call her Cece, but yeah, Cecilia for like, I always had an obsession with Simon and Garfunkel's Cecilia. And I was like,
it's a good song.
This is a no-brainer. That song was written in late 70s. This car was bought in the late 70s. Her name's Cece.
Yeah.
One of the things about cars that I didn't like about my Pontiac was the whole computer system. I didn't like the idea that, to figure out what was going on, someone had to plug something in to tell me, and shops would want $100 just to plug in the machine and tell you what's wrong. Just the diagnostic fee. And I'm just like, that's ridiculous. Come on.
Yeah.
You've already bought the tool. The tool itself is generally only $100. So it's a money maker for the dealerships.
Yeah.
But I knew you could get a free reading from like an auto parts store. So like an O'Reilly's or an AutoZone. They'll plug in their reader, tell you what's wrong, and let you go from there. I just didn't like that aspect, that I was so reliant on a computer when cars back in the day were all mechanical and generally people could fix them. Tangent off of that, my dad's side of the family owned a auto parts store for the longest time. So my dad was growing up, like I remember going to that store as a kid. It's now out of business. My dad's cousin finally sold the business a couple years ago now. So I know that you could fix cars and it didn't used to be this hard.
Right.
I wanted a car that didn't have a computer in it, something that was just, in theory, I could drop the engine and transmission out of my car myself. I wouldn't need anyone else to help me with that. I wouldn't need special tools to do that. There's just so much I can do myself and, save myself the labor cost. It's a win-win all around. It takes time. That's the asterisk to that, it's my time that I have to spend on it. But I look at it, I'm like, well, my time's worth $120, $150 an hour that'd be paying someone else's labor.
Sure. Fair enough.
And I just reason it away that way.
I've honestly, sorry to tangent off of that, but I've gone through a lot of my life thinking it's either time or money. That's just all it really boils down to.
Yeah.
Do you want to save time and spend money, or do you want to save money and spend time?
And the amount of, when I showed up with the car the first time, everyone's like, what are you doing? Why do you have this old car? It's going to break down all the time. You have to drive to work all the time. How is this going to work? This isn't adding up. And I'm like, well, no, I'm going to spend the money to get the engine professionally done. I'm still not at a level to do an engine rebuild yet. One day I hope to have a large enough garage that I'll have the space and the tools to do an engine rebuild, but that is not right now. There's some expensive tools involved with that.
Sure.
The hard-earned money being a musician, then going to someone doing the stuff that I could very well learn to do myself.
Sure.
And as always, the first time you do something, it takes way longer. You're just like, is it really worth it? But now I can go change brakes really quick, just as fast as a mechanic would, and I save myself the $500.
Do people ask you to do that? Have you had other friends go up and say, hey,
I've done it a couple times for friends now, because I also like doing it, because whenever I take the car in for my last car in for oil change or brakes, they'd always tell me, we need to do this or you need to do that. Or, I had a check engine light on for ages because I had a bad O2 sensor. It's a $50 part and they want $700 because you have to go in and pull all these parts out and do all this labor, and inevitably they'll find something else.
Right.
It'll just keep going. It was annoying. And I just like being able to know that my harder money was going towards something that actually I knew was going to fix a problem, instead of just creating more problems and being a money pit because I'm oblivious and I'm getting scammed.
Right. So you said you got the engine professionally done. Yes. Everything else, though, is what you've adjusted or worked on the car, or?
For the most part, the exhaust and the rear brakes were rebuilt by a shop because they were beyond what I could do. When I got the car, there was some stuff that was rusted. The car sounded like a Harley when I got it. The exhaust was completely cosmetic. It had so many holes in it. I could get most of the bolts off. I was sitting there, I remember, because I bought the car. I was in the neighborhood and friends had walked by and they're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, and I'm I'm sitting here with a blowtorch on this nut on the engine, and they're kind of looking like, well, wait, where's the fuel line? And I point, oh, it's just 6 inches over here. They're like, well, that's kind of dangerous. I'm like, well, you just don't do this. And like, don't. I'm like, no, it's off. Don't worry.
Yeah, right.
But, I'm sitting here heating up these nuts, and I just couldn't get them off. So eventually I drove the car over to a shop. I was like, I can't do this. Here are the parts. Can you guys finish this up? I don't want to strip a bolt and turn this into a $600, $700 job. I'd much rather this be the $150, $200 job, because I'd done most of the work. So, I did that. And then they did the rear brakes for me as well, because those rear brakes were toast.
Okay.
They were really bad. And I hadn't done drum brakes before. The rears are drum brakes, and I wasn't familiar with them yet. I'd only been working on calipers and rotors. So I was like, let's just get this professionally done, because I don't have the time. I needed the car working and able to stop.
Yeah, no, certainly.
And those were relatively inexpensive fixes. But otherwise, everything else on the car I've done myself.
Yeah, that's really impressive.
Which includes I just did the master cylinder last week. This spring, I converted the front brakes, which had been drums. I converted those to disc brakes for better stopping power, and they're just easier to maintain. All the stopping power is in the front anyways. So,
sure. Yeah. So
just,
front wheel drive vehicle?
No, rear wheel.
Oh, it's rear wheel. Oh.
The engine's in the rear. And
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
They are phenomenal snow cars, because the engine and transmission just sit right over the rear axle. So the weight and all that's distributed right there. So it's really hard to get any kind of fishtailing.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about that.
No, that's really, everyone's always really weird when I open up the front. They're like, oh, the engine. They see this trunk.
The trunk, yeah.
Instead, they're like, wait, where's the engine go? I'm like, aha, that's the secret about VWs. They don't have engines. They just run on pure will. That's why they're all still around.
Well, I have a couple floating questions. Is it difficult to find parts for your vehicle?
No, that was one of the reasons why I was looking at an old VW Beetle, or any kind of old VW. There's a massive aftermarket parts business still. And being in California, you can find old VWs in junkyards, and you can go fishing for parts that way as well and find stuff that way.
Is that how you do it sometimes? Is literally
I haven't had to do that yet. 71 was the first year they made the Super Beetle. The big difference is they're a couple extra inches longer than the standard Beetles, all the Herbies that we grew up with seeing. And the front end, and this was the main reason why I opted for this instead of an older standard Beetle, the front end has these things called McPherson struts, which are far more akin to what current suspensions are.
Okay.
And I was just like, if I'm going to be in this car for multiple hours a day, a little bit nicer suspension would be nice. And it adds some extra weight. I have a friend who has a 67 Beetle, and he kept a 50-pound bag of dog food in the front of the car. The front was so light that you hit a bump weird, and that front of the car comes up real easily.
Oh, funny.
And it just, with that weight, you feel a bit more in control of the steering wheel.
Grounded. Yeah, sure.
There's no power steering in this car. This is all forearm strength, which is fine. When you're moving, it's super easy to turn. It just sucks when you're stationary. So parts are easy to find still. That was one of the main reasons why I went with this kind of older vehicle. I know I could find parts, and the parts are relatively inexpensive. Flip side is that sometimes the parts aren't the highest quality, but as I've had the car, I've kind of learned where I can find some higher quality parts. It costs more to get the higher quality ones, but in some cases it makes sense. Like, I was having a serious issue with my turn signal, and I'd gotten a cheap one. It just hadn't been working. And so I got one. The cheap one was like $35. The nice one was like $120. I got the nice one. Still didn't work, only because months later discovered a fuse had been blown. And once I replaced this, a fuse that cost 10 cents, and all of a sudden my turn signal was working. I'm like, oh, I feel stupid. But then I was like, well, I got a real nice turn signal out of this though. So, okay, all right, this will be fine.
Yeah, sure.
That whole process, I learned a whole bunch about the electrical wiring, which can be a nightmare in older cars. It's literally what VW owners have called the rat's nest, which is the electrical harness that lives in the front, and it takes a lot to figure out what goes to what and where it's going and what it's doing.
Sure.
I have diagrams and everything, and then you pray that the wire hasn't been changed, because if the wire is a different color, it's going to be different than what the diagram says. So then you're going around in it. So I actually have little pieces of electrical tape that I have different colors of that I tape to the wires, so I can remember, oh, this is that wire part of this system.
I see.
So I don't goof it up. So I've had to make my own system. So yeah, their parts are still available for the vehicle. They're relatively inexpensive, and every once in a while, I'll get one that isn't quite that great, and I'm either to spend spend more to get a better one, or I can doctor it up enough to make it still work. Which I should say, just in general in cars, parts are relatively cheap for cars, no matter what it is. It's the labor that kills you. That's what gets you all the time. And it's kind of like, if you can figure out the things in the car that you know you can do yourself, or if you can replace your own air filter, piece of cake. All it takes is a screwdriver, maybe a Phillips head screwdriver. Ooh. Or headlamps, bulbs. It's like, that's something you can do easily yourself. Once you kind of figure out where the electrics are going, you can just pull it out, change the light bulb. I remember once, this was before I was aware of just the money I was throwing away at the dealership. I think I got charged like $75 to replace a headlamp.
Wow.
And then once I gotten into doing brakes and everything and realized, I can do lamps too. A part that costs you $350, but I paid $75 for someone to replace it for me once. I'm just like, I can spend my money in better ways.
Yeah, well, to play devil's advocate for a split second, on one end, I mean, that is someone's income, right? But I mean, this is why auto repair places are just notorious, right? The inflation amount or like of labor to cost and all that stuff is just absurd.
Yeah, and in the end, the mechanics that are working in those shops, most of them don't want to be just changing light bulbs. They didn't get into car repair for doing light bulbs. They probably got into car repair because they love working on engines and just understanding the mechanical aspects of why that car runs the way it does. And they're there to be problem solvers, not, you're too lazy to replace a bulb. Okay, fine. I mean, hey, pays the bills. I don't care.
I guess I would be akin to like me playing Pachelbel's Canon versus like,
It's the same thing. You're just like, I mean, I guess it's paying the bill. I mean, how many times have you upcharged? I mean, I would think if anyone, I haven't done a wedding in forever, but thankfully no one's asked for Pachelbel's Canon. But if someone had, I'm like, oh, gee, what was the price I quoted you? That's going to change. Pachelbel's Canon does get the wedding tax. I think that's the one tune I'd be like, no, wedding tax is enforced. I don't like the concept of a wedding tax. The second someone says wedding, it's like, it's going to cost you more.
Yeah,
like,
no.
You're giving me the same product as the cupcakes you made for little Sally's birthday on the same weekend.
Right.
So
I guess I'm just trying to like legitimize either why they're overcharging for labor or also the problematic aspects of that, and how you're skirting that system and being a self-sufficient person and learning how to fix your own problems in a way, that's
really what it all stems from in the end. It's like, it's just so often, and I think everyone just will say, there's an app for that. There's an app for someone to pick up your laundry and do it for you. There's an app for someone to fuel up your car for you because you forgot, or I don't know. There's apps to rent people's cars. There's apps for renting nice car. There's just an app for everything. And I just kind of got tired of seeing all these apps for, food delivery. I'm like, I can just get on my bike and go down to my restaurant and pick up my order.
Right.
I don't need to spend $5 to have someone drive it 10 blocks. It's like, if I'm going to eat out, I might as well, get a little exercise and offset the extra
calories. Like go out. That's part of the...
Yes. And so it really all just stems from self-sufficiency and being able to, say, no, I can do that myself. I'm not reliant on a massive inflated system that requires me to participate to keep it going. I think it's something that a lot of people have lost. And maybe this has just come from, we spend hours upon hours in practice rooms and we're like, Bach cello suite isn't going to learn itself. I got to do this. No one's going to learn it for me. I have to learn it.
That's
and I
really
think maybe
great connection.
That might have carried over a little bit into the car repair and just in general, just wanting to be able to have pride of saying, I did this myself. I can do this myself. There's nothing unique about that. I'm just a person that likes to figure stuff out.
One of my points I wanted to mention is that we're in such a disposable society sometimes. And that's the thing. I think oftentimes, we run cars until, if we're lucky, to like 300,000 miles and then we chuck them because, the newest car's out and the value of it, you might as well invest in the next new car. So then, and that's, part of the auto industry's whole sales pitch too, is to do that.
Oh, yeah.
But there is something really great, unique, special about like what you're doing, which is restoring this old car, that there's parts that you can replace. The fundamental of it, there's nothing wrong, right? I mean,
well, the thing I was looking for, I wanted to find a car that didn't have any structural rust. Car's got rust. It's 50 years old. It's been living in the Bay Area its whole life. It's going to have rust.
Yeah.
There isn't any structural rust on it. And the little bit of problem that I have, one day when I have college loans paid off and I can save up the money, the car will get a makeover.
But you basically plan to have this car essentially for the longevity of.
I sure hope so. I don't want to say more on that because I don't want to jinx it.
Of course, right. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
I have one buddy that keeps saying I should instead throw down the money and get an old VW bus and just swap out my engine for that.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just like, why? I have the Beetle. It gets me from point A to point B, and the buses actually cost more. Those are the ones that everyone wants. Everyone wants the old buses right now. I'm just like, no, I'll stick with my Beetle. Because a couple of folks, well, they're not really worth much right now. I'm like, yeah, but if I keep driving this and I take care of it and keep it clean, like this will go up in value at some point.
Actually, I was just out of curiosity before recording today, I did look up sales prices for 71 Volkswagen Super Beetle, and they're like, there's a range, of course, because of maintenance, but some of them were in the teens thousands. Like you could easily buy a brand new car. It's competitive in that way, and I was kind of surprised. But
yeah, I mean, if they have receipts and can show the engine's in good shape and the transmission's in good shape, and you've done some stuff to soup it up, if there isn't rust and the interior's in good shape, you can turn a tidy little profit on the vehicle. I never expect to break even on the car. If I ever sell it, I'll always be a couple thousand behind. But already the owners wanted something just short of $4,000. I had it checked out, knew there was engine trouble already. She ran. That's the nice thing with these VW engines. You can run them. Whereas most cars now, like if you have a bad seal on the engine or anything, the car's just not going to run. Like you might get a couple hundred miles out of it, but then the engine's just going to tank.
Yeah.
The mechanic that redid the engine had nicknamed the car the Exxon Valdez because she was leaking so much oil. The seals were bad. Both the heads were cracked, but the car still ran. And so that's one of the unique things about these older vehicles is that, these suckers were built to run. They weren't built in this disposable income era.
Yeah.
And, you do your research, you can find folks that make parts just the same way. And the fear is always that if you're replacing with an aftermarket part, that you're going to get something that falls into that disposable income era. But most of the parts are pretty good and hold up. But yeah, the value, I mean, yeah, so they wanted something like short of $4,000, and I was able to talk them into $1,500 for it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, the engine has to be rebuilt. And they're like, well, we're not going to do an engine rebuild. I'm like, okay, well, that's going to cost me this much.
Yeah.
And so then I gave them a ballpark quote and they went with it. And I send them photos every once in a while and keep them updated. I try to go by once a year and show them the car and show them what I've been up to and what I've done.
That's sweet. Yeah. To like keep it within, they see the life of the car too.
Yeah. I'm just the third owner. They were second owner, and one of the folks, it was their grandparents that originally owned it. And when I bought it, the receipt had the original address, and their grandparents had lived just 2 blocks from where I lived at the time.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of like really sealed the deal. It was like, oh, the car is going back to the neighborhood. It's going back to where it came from. And so they were happy. And they saw that I really was all about, keeping the car going and like bringing it back to life and giving it new legs and whatnot. So.
Oh, that's like a really touching story, like to have it all come full circle again. Yeah. There is a sense of like you have pride in the work that you did on your car, and you can drive around knowing that you are literally getting yourself from point A to point B because of all the maintenance that you've done on it.
In our lessons, we're always talking like, look, it's not just about playing trombone. It's not about playing euphonium. These are life lessons. Mm-hmm. It's like when you run into a challenge playing your instrument, this isn't just how you deal with that challenge on an instrument, but how do you deal with that challenge as an individual? Like,
right.
Do you face that challenge? Do you avoid that challenge? And understanding that process, I'm like, it's a lot easier to learn these kind of life lessons on an instrument than in real life.
Where you're not juggling chainsaws around, for instance.
We're not juggling chainsaws where, there's just a little part of me that likes just being able to be average Joe.
Yeah.
Where I can sit down and yes, I do these amazing musical things and have these amazing musical opportunities that in my wildest dreams, I never thought I was going to get to sub with the likes of San Francisco Symphony ever. That's nuts. But I could walk down to the corner bar and sit down and talk with, whatever average Joe is in the bar, and we can just talk about cars or just fixing stuff and oblivious to the fact that I'm a professional musician.
Right.
I think it's a wonderful thing. I think more people need to have that. I think that's a really great way to be able to make music look like not this elitist thing that only happens LA or, only happens in highfalutin orchestra halls, but it's something for everyone to enjoy, and that you're allowed to know other musicians and people that do that, and that, they're running through the same problems that the rest of us are having.
Right.
Especially during the pandemic. We're all in this together.
Oh, seriously.
I just like being able to still talk with random people off the street and be able to relate and being able to make that connection and then be able to say, hey, you should come check out this concert. And they're like, okay, yeah, why not? It's
I know you you. I want to support you, even though I've never gone to a concert before. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole stigma of like, well, I know nothing about that music. Why would I go see a symphony concert? Anyone that's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, look, you can just tell everyone's like, someone in the band. And most of the folks in the audience probably won't be able to say that.
Right. It's funny. It's like, as we're talking about this is actually a perfect segue to my final two questions for you.
Great.
Is that cool? Okay.
Yes.
What, in your opinion, is the most common misconception of classical music and the classical music world?
Oh, that we're stuck up elitists that operate in a white collar society. The thing that gets lost in everyone's like, these orchestras, they're union orchestras. We are technically blue collar workers. And all we're asking is just to make a fair living wage. There's no crime in that. We're not sitting here asking for millions of dollars.
Right.
It's like, I just want a living wage and some health insurance.
Right.
I want to be able to do what I love, do it well, inspire others to go do the things that they want to do, and be able to just put a roof over my family's head and whatnot.
Yeah.
Send my kids to college or trade school, whatever they want to do after school. Have an American dream instead of having to fight tooth and nail to make a living as a musician and explain that what I do is important. People say, well, music's not that important. I'm like, okay, you go a full day without listening to any music. Like if you hear a commercial with
seriously
music on, you have to turn it off. You hear music on the TV, you got to turn it off. You can't listen to any music. No music.
No movies. Right?
No movies, no TV, no radio, no entertainment sources. It's like music is intrinsically a part of that. And once people start realizing that, they generally come around.
Yeah.
Classical music isn't stuffy. It doesn't have to be stuffy. Yes, it helps if you understand, what Chopin was doing that fall when he wrote this prelude. But you don't have to know that to enjoy good music. And I think just being patient and open to experiencing something new, that's really it. It's just like, go experience, live life. We're only here, whatever. I don't know what happened before. I don't know what happens after, but I at least want to have fun at this part that I'm experiencing now.
Yeah.
No reason to limit that. Orchestra music is the basis of so much music that we listen to now. And you don't have to feel snooty to go listen to it.
Right.
I think that's the message I want to get across, is that it's for everyone.
Don't be fooled by the tuxes that we wear, basically.
Yeah.
After all the impact that COVID has done to classical music, what do you think is something positive that will enhance and carry on in our profession?
Ooh. I think there's going to be some unique, because I know composers are writing music with the current health restrictions in place. And I think many folks, orchestras that have been able to do stuff live, they've been able to explore the string repertoire without, the fear of running away an audience. Because it's all they can do right now in a lot of places is only strings. I think COVID will cause that. I think in the middle of COVID, having the Black Lives Matter yet again become so prominent. I mean, I don't know why it isn't prominent all the time. I don't know why this is still a problem, but I sure hope that orchestras are working their butts off to diversify their catalogs and represent composers of all backgrounds, not just rich, dead white guys.
Right.
Get the female composers out there. We know they're out there, and we know there are various folks of different ethnic backgrounds that have written music. There's no reason not to do that. And we need to do that, as we're a Eurocentric organization. Black Lives Matter. The whole point is to move away from a Eurocentric models. And I know one of my big things is I sure hope maybe the audition process can finally get rid of the last couple biases left. We do a good job with screened auditions, and most auditions I've been to, they've had carpet on the floor so you can't tell if someone's wearing flats or heels. But I want this whole invite only stuff to go, or send in a recording. We really need to go to just, I know it's more work for the committees and financially a larger undertaking for the orchestras, but we need to be going back to cattle call. Everyone needs to have a fair shake at it. The invite only process, or in the auto advancing, who's going to be in those final rounds. And if the committee's content, they'll just go with the people in that. So the prelim round ends up being a facade, which, having been on both sides of the screen, I know that's not the case, but also it's hard not to make that argument. At the same time, it's very frustrating. The amount of auditions that I've seen, someone that gets auto advanced and they end up being the winner and they didn't do the prelims. I'm just like, well, can they get through the prelim? My argument is that is a win for everyone all around. Yes, it's some more money the orchestra, the ensemble has to spend, but it's a quick and easy way to show people how you're making changes, to then show that we're changing with times and we're not just saying
business as usual kind of
complaining. Oh, we're losing our audience. Why are we losing our audience? Like, we're losing our audience because we're not programming music for everyone. We're programming music for a very small subsection of the population. It's like, we need to do more. We need to show that we are making sure that everyone has a fair shake at getting a job in this orchestra. extra.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of people saying, well, those are just really small things. I'm like, yes, but if we're removing bias, if you want to remove the concept of implicit bias, this is what we have to do.
I can't argue with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely have brought this up before with other people. I'm like, well, but what's the big deal to you? It's like, you're a trombone player, white male. I'm like, I want to see more women and folks of ethnicities at these auditions. And there's a disconnect because the other end, I'm like, I want to win this job.
Right.
But I want to see more people. You go and look at the conservatories, you see all the diversity. The music schools are 100% on board with this. There's a disconnect somewhere between finishing music school and winning an orchestra
and employment.
job that is completely lost.
Well,
and we need to figure out a way to make that better.
And another way to put it is you want a fair fight. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to have any kind of privilege on top of, I guess that's all I'm saying. I think, yeah.
Yeah. And I get into trouble there because people go like, well, you're white and male. The world's been gifted to you in a handbasket already. I'm like, yeah, but I want it to be fair for everyone, not just me. I've had the benefit. I want to share that benefit with those who haven't had that before me. And there's no reason we can't do that.
Yeah. Mic drop.
Mic drop.
At that point. Thank you for those excellent answers. I think that it really is important. In any case, are there any platforms or websites for our listeners to learn more about you or, any upcoming projects that you might have?
Yeah. I got my website, www.bonetrom.com, BONETROM. It's just trombone split in half and reversed around. I should have an edited version of my recital up there and you can get a hold of me through there. And then, Instagram, you can check me out at the Bone Trom. And if you want to see photos of my car, if you put in Super Cecilia 71, it should come up. And that's the car.
And that's on Instagram as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Instagram.
Great. And if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, go ahead and press that subscribe button and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The reviews and ratings help this podcast be more visible to others, and it's a free way to support this podcast. Another free way, though, is to tell your friends and family about it, and you can always become a part of the Haydn Behind the Music Stand family by donating to our Patreon page at patreon.com/Haydn Music Stand. Don't forget, there's a Spotify playlist available that contains all the pieces we discussed on the podcast. It's all really great music, and the link is always in the description of each episode. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Haydn Music Stand for more content. Thank you so much for being on the show, CL. It's so great to finally meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, Patty. Thanks so much for having me. This is just a lot of fun. It's nice to be able to sit down and talk and not feel like I'm watching the world crumble around me.
Oh, I know, right? Absolutely. And I also, again, want to say, thank you for sharing your story. It takes a lot of guts to kind of go up on a platform like this and do what you're doing. So, and I really hope one day that I'll be able to return to San Francisco and see you perform and also say hi to you in person, because
yes, indeed. You come out, or I'm back in the Midwest and find myself in Twin Cities. I got family there. So I'm there every once in a while.
Yeah. Hit me up. Sounds good.
For sure.
Okay. And thanks for listening. Say bye, sushi.